welcome to another edition of the Nerdy Agent Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Pettersen, with my brother and fellow nerd, AJ. Josh is not here, so we have added a third person to the podcast, the chair, the advisory chair.
The advisory chair. I just like how you just flexed and rose the table just mid-intro. That was amazing.
It's necessary. We got to get, this table's got to be high enough so I'm not curling my back the whole time just to speaking in this microphone. Today we are going to talk about some fun predictions we have about the future of real estate in regards to mostly homeowners, sellers, a little bit of everything in between. But to start, the Would You Rather of the Week, brought to you by ChatGPT. Would you rather buy a haunted mansion with a ghostly butler or a quirky, brightly colored tiny home with a family of clowns as your neighbor?
Okay, a couple of questions. Does the butler cook food for me?
I don't think he's capable of cooking food.
That's not cool. Do the clowns make me laugh, or are they sad clowns?
50-50.
God, we got to ask the chatbot.
Clowns.
I think I choose the clowns too, Haley. The haunted mansion, I mean, a ghostly butler seems kind of lame, and it's in your house, but doesn't make your food. Like, that's just stupid.
What's the point
I don't
of
want
the
that.
butler then?
Worthless. Luke?
This is a tough one. I'm just a little concerned that, like, if it had just said, like, with a ghost butler, the ghostly, though, makes me think the butler maybe is, like, a little scary. Like, he's ghostly. Like,
Lee, yeah.
He's
you know.
a haunted butler.
This is not your average Casper butler.
No, it's not. Or from that new movie about the guy in the attic. I forgot what that was called, though. I'm probably going with the...
Tiny home.
It's so small, though, guys. You can
So
barely
small,
live in
but
it.
so many colors.
And the clowns might be scary. I'm going to go with the butler. Haunted mansion with the butler.
Wow. All right.
You guys both went with the tiny homes?
We'll take
Yes,
it. Yeah,
yes.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, well, getting into what matters on this podcast. A few weeks ago, we discussed the inventory crisis, or last week. That's kind of happening in the Twin Cities market right now, and what might come of that. One of the things that we talked about actually was possibly an increase in house renovations and additions versus sellers moving and upgrading houses. And this weekend, funny enough, I've been touring a lot of homes in St. Louis Park, and for the people who don't know that aren't from the Twin Cities area, the homes in St. Louis Park are, the majority of them, the same. They're very boxy, they're similar builds. And this specific one, though, that I had toured, instead of it being a box, it had an addition off the back where the kitchen was expanded and there was a dining room in it. So it was a huge kitchen with a dining room in that addition. And I looked at it and thought, I literally turned to my buyers and said, I wouldn't be surprised if 50% of the houses in St. Louis Park in 10 years had something added on the back of them because of the inventory crisis, because of the interest rate situation we have. And so I thought this would be a fun podcast to kind of just make some predictions about. So I'm curious what you think about that as well, AJ.
I mean, it seems fair. Like, I think there's a lot of people right now we've talked about that are either considering, if they are considering buying, they're considering keeping their home and not selling it, which we talked about, just because if you talk to a financial advisor, they would probably advise you, hey, if you can do this and keep the rate at 2.5 on a 30-year fix, like, why would you ever sell that rate? It just doesn't make a ton of sense. But there are folks who are saying, I like the area I'm in, because really the only reason to move, if you like your rate, is your house isn't big enough, or you don't like the area you're in, or the layout maybe, right? But there's things you can change in a home. You can't pick it up and move it, typically. People have done it from time to time. But typically moving a home just doesn't make a ton of sense financially. So if you like the spot you're in, but you just need something bigger or a layout change, renovations make a ton of sense, because if you blend the rate, even if you do a construction loan, if you blend the rates together, you're still taking advantage of what the previous market was, right? So if you had 2.5, 2.75, and you owe, let's just say $300,000 on that, and you want to do $150,000 in renovations, you're only really capturing today's rate for 50% or 33% of the future, but 50% more mortgage. And so your blended rate together is still way better than the current market.
Not to mention, based on what we've been seeing in the market, that addition may, 10 years down the line, pay back pretty well for yourself.
It depends on the area, right? So, like, to your point,
in St. Louis Park, I'm specifically was kind of what I.
We're starting to see now as the prices go up and up and up. I mean, we're doing a big addition in our house that we're almost figured out the plans and everything before it gets started, and we added that bonus room not just because it would make a ton of sense for us, but because above ground square footage in Minnetonka is worth, like, I don't know, $300 to $350 a square foot. Well, if I can add 500 square feet, that's worth 150, 175,000, and the cost of actually adding that onto the project isn't that much money. So you see a lot of these decisions being made. And to your point, St. Louis Park's super similar, right? A $350,000 house with 900 square feet above ground and 500 in the basement.
All of a sudden, you had 500 more above grade.
I mean, right. You're looking at 500 above grade in St. Louis Park might be worth 400 a square foot.
Mm-hmm.
Does that math check out? Yeah, it kind of does. I mean, if it's super nice, 350, 400 square foot, right? And back in the day, it was like, oh wow, 200 square foot, super, super high. And not that that's always how we value property, but when an appraiser comes out and appraises your property,
it matters.
It matters, right? And so that extra 500 square feet could be worth 150, $200,000 in some of these areas, and those projects and the pricing of all the materials and everything are coming down so much that they're starting to get pretty similar again. Whereas in the past, people would say, don't do an addition if you think it's an investment because it's going to cost you a lot more than it's going to add in value.
Mm-hmm. And historically, you're also working in the same interest rate environment most of the time too, right? So they'd say that, but they'd also say, but at the same time, your rate wasn't 3% better than the prevailing market rate when they were giving that suggestion, right? So you have to factor in the monthly payment into that as well. So it becomes
if you're moving, yeah, and if you're moving within the same market, so let's just say St. Louis Park because that's what you brought up, St. Louis Park to St. Louis Park.
Oh, then yeah.
Well, if I'm losing my 2.5 or 2.75 and picking up a 6.25, it really, really screws the math up quite a bit. So to get the house that you could get if you just added on might be $500 more a month potentially. And by the way, like Luke said previously, this inventory crisis is making it super hard to even get under contract on something. So there's a cost of moving. There's the difficulty of getting under contract as a buyer right now with no homes on the market. And then there's this, pricing of renovations versus value that's all kind of pushing things in that direction.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, if you're moving in the same market, I didn't even think of buyers like that. I was more so thinking people that were just like, I'm just not going to move because it doesn't make sense. If you wanted just a bigger house in the same city, you're almost right now probably always better off. I mean, $200,000 goes a long ways in St. Louis Park to make the current house you have a lot nicer.
Well, and I think too, you have to realize that there is some, stress associated with doing an addition.
There's going to be, yeah, that's true.
You're going to have to deal with that either way, but does it offset the stress of buying a house? Who really knows, right? At this point.
So I want to back up a little bit into the pandemic. Just because we did see, to be clear, I don't think we're yet seeing an increase in additions being had. I do think that this is going to take a little bit of lag time because I still think people are thinking, well, maybe rates will come back down, right? There's still some talk about that. But if 2-3 years from now, rates are still 5.5, I think that's when people might say, hey, this is never going to change. So this might make more sense for me. But I want to back up into the pandemic because I do think that when the pandemic started and when it was going on, there was an increase in demand for home renovations. So I was just curious your thoughts on that as to why that maybe came up and how that's continued since the pandemic has ended.
I think you've seen, there's a lot of things, right? So there's the kids being at home from school during that time period. There's some places where that's still a thing in some regard. Every once in a while, you see a lot of these open floor plans without any separate rooms for people to do work or to do school. Heck, we added an office in our basement. I had a neighbor who turned his garage into a home gym. You saw a lot of that because people thought the gym's closed. I still want to work out. If I go out and spend $2,000 on a bunch of workout equipment, that's 10 months of my $200 a month lifetime fitness membership. I'm paid back within a year if I just cancel my subscription. Then they realize, they go, okay, I actually like working out at home. This is kind of fun. And then they go, I don't have to spend 15 minutes driving to the gym. I have all the equipment I wanted. People aren't taking my machine. There's all these sorts of things that start to happen, and it's only because the pandemic kicked it all off, right? Working from home is the same thing. People went to the office over and over and over every single day of the week, 9 to 5. They drove 30 minutes. They came home in traffic. They did all the things. Then their employer said, you can work from home Mondays and Fridays or whatever it is, right?
Got out of bed at 8:30, started work at 9.
Exactly, yeah. Right? And they shipped them equipment to work just the same. And they were like, I can take my dog for a walk during lunch, and I can, hang out with my spouse or hang out with my kids more during the summer. I'm just as efficient. I can get my work done in probably less amount of time because people aren't chit-chatting and screwing around with me. So I'm just going to build a little room for myself in my house. I'll get my work done there, and now I'm not going to come back necessarily to my office, right? Or they did an addition. We saw people, I mean, our parents built a shed in their backyard.
They did.
A lot of people have done that. And so you're seeing a lot of these things start to continue. It was all kicked off, I think, by the pandemic, but then people realized the ease at which they could live their life given the reality that they were in. And so now that that's all over pretty much, it's still happening.
They're still thinking about it. And I would say the other piece there too is I think that, again, it continues, but you built the office and you thought, oh, that's kind of nice. And then you started staying at home a little bit more because you're working from home and your kids are staying home. And you thought, maybe our kitchen could need to use a little bit of an upgrade. I'm here so often, I might as well do something to increase my standard of living. And they start kind of doing those other renovations. And they're like, well, the bathroom maybe needs to be, I'm here all the time. I'm in this bathroom all the time. I might as well make it look a little bit nicer, right? So I think kind of all of that had a big impact on kind of what people were doing with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're going to continue to see it, right? I think a lot of it's filtered through, but the way that we live now, the way that we work, the way that we do school, the way that we operate in our homes has
just different,
materially changed. Yeah. So it'll be super interesting to see how that, impacts not only listing inventory coming on, but also this home renovation and addition kind of trend that's been going on.
Yeah, and so that's what I want to get into next. So I want to chat about the impact that might come about in the housing market if we do continue to see an increase in home renovations and additions. And not necessarily, I do think that the home renovations it was about as busy during the pandemic, was about as busy as contractors had ever been. And we experienced that when we were doing renovations because it was tough to even get people to our properties. But I think as renovations continue, as additions start to happen, how might this affect the housing market from a price perspective, from an inventory perspective?
Yeah, so I think these people that are doing these additions and home renovations, and I won't say all of them, but a lot of them are newer families just starting out, and they're growing into their home and maybe thinking, I need a little bit more space down the road, right? Or I need a little more space right now. I think what that's going to do from a real estate agent perspective is it just decreases the velocity of the movement, right? Mm-hmm. So it may or may not impact the overall levels of inventory, because I think I said in the last podcast, like, that consumer is a seller and a buyer typically. So they're adding a home to the market and they're taking a home away. And if they're moving within the Twin Cities local market, they're not adding anything or taking anything. From a macro
perspective, it's
they're
about
not
the same.
adding or taking anything away, right? But they are removing 2 transactions from the marketplace, right? So as agents, I say this all the time because people come to me like 2020, 2019, oh, the real estate market's so hot, that must be so great for you. And I'm like, well, it depends, right? Like, if it's hot because there's a ton of transactions, that's what makes our businesses grow, right? From a macro perspective, everybody's business does better and better when there's more sales, right? But one could say now, it's so hot, it must be so great. And it's like, we're doing really well right now, actually. We've done some nice pivots and we're adding transaction count. We're going to sell more homes than we did last year. The majority of the market has lost 30, 40, 50% of their sales. And I've talked to a lot of people like that have that going on in their business. And so it's hot, but
that's what I tell everybody when I get that, because I do get that a lot. That must be so good for you. And I say, well, the good news is that my business is growing really fast. I have a lot of people reaching out. I have a lot of clients I'm working with, which is great. However, it's significantly harder to find any of them a house that they want. And that twofold: one, obviously it makes us, we do have to work a little bit more, right? And that's real. But it also is, it's kind of just disheartening from a wanting your clients to have the best possible outcome with the least amount of stress and sadness, because they lose more, and they maybe find a house that they need to do a little bit more to make it something that they want. And so that's a good piece, because I get that all the time.
And if you look at the last, I'll call it for sure 3 years, so dating back to, what would that be, 2020 in April, right? But save for 3 months in October, November, and December of 2022, it's been hot.
Yeah.
It's been difficult as a buyer the entire time, but the transaction count is wildly different from 2020. I mean, we can pull those numbers, but we're looking, we're 30% less pending sales across our marketplace than 2022. That's wild, right? And I'm guaranteeing that that's lower. I mean, I can pull it up while we're on here, than it was even the years leading up to that, right? So if you look at like pending sale data, like that's exactly what we operate off of. And it's down a lot, even with the market being, again, hot.
Yep. So the summary of that is, inventory levels won't necessarily be change that much. Obviously, our inventory levels at the moment, I don't know if they can really go down more. It's obviously possible. It would be difficult with we're thinking we're at a bottom, but the biggest of impact is going to be agents, debatably, on how many transactions will happen if these additions become a thing.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like we ballooned during the pandemic because people said, "Oh, I'm working from home. I can do part-time real estate." I mean, we added thousands and thousands and thousands of people that we're now seeing starting to drop off because either A, they were part-time and they never learned the skills required to actually operate in a marketplace where they needed some skills, or B, they just didn't focus on growing their business during that time. They just took whatever was coming, and now whatever is coming is 40% less than it was.
Mm-hmm. You have the numbers?
I'm looking at them now. I mean, we had at the top 1,750 pending sales, 2020, 2021. The top last year was 1,500. Okay. This year it's going to be about 1,200. So you're talking 50% less than 2020 and 2021 in pending transactions. That's a really, really big drop across our marketplace. So pretty wild.
And that could only continue to happen if we see these sellers sticking in their houses. The other thing I want to talk about is the prices. And obviously we don't have a magic 8 ball. But if people start to do additions, they start to kind of do that route. What does that do to house prices within the market?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I think values start to rise when people start to invest in their properties, right? But whether those people would have become just a regular buyer that bought a more expensive home it's hard to say how that's going to really impact values. But I think overall, as the velocity slows down, it usually starts to grind on the buyers a lot more than the sellers, and it's going to start to push those prices up. And as we talked about earlier, March median sale price versus last year's March median sale price was pretty much flat, which is wild. I made the prediction that I think April is probably going to be up 3-4% from last April, just because I think the factor of the rates leveling off is continuing to filter through. And these April and May closings, we're seeing a ton more of our transactions, even our teams turning in, being over list price, multiple offers more often than not.
And I think that the price is a little bit twofold, right? You can look at it as to if they sold, they would buy another place, and that could do something on the back end. However, you can also argue that them doing an addition not only improves the quality of their house, which improves the prices in the neighborhood typically, but they're also constraining the market by removing a supply. I know they are adding a demand, but if the demand is if they're selling a $350,000 house and the demand is to buy a $600,000 house, they would be helping the market, the first-time home buyer market, better than they would be if they just did an addition and stayed in their property.
That's a great point. I think we've talked about different price points, different areas, and we talk about the macro market a lot, but even if we break it down into even a macro market across one city or one price point, we are seeing that showing activity is even down across those first-time buyer price points. And people are like, well, does that mean there's a lot less first-time buyers? And it's like, well, no, it just means there's nothing available in those price points because they're not moving, right? And part of that could be what you're saying, right? They're adding on to their house, and down the road, we just completely lost a first-time buyer home, right? So
because even when they do the addition, then now it's not even really a first-time home buyer
house. We're removing first-time buyer homes potentially from the marketplace.
It's an interesting point that could become a big issue for first-time home buyers in 10 years. The last thing I want to talk about, kind of wrap it in on the script of the week. Like you had said, this is going to be, if this continues with the constraint in the market, with pending sales down, this could be of large impact to a lot of different real estate agents in the market because they're removing transactions that they otherwise would have, money that they otherwise would have. And so I want to talk about, or give me an idea on how agents can properly aid clients, that the conversation now shifts from, hey, I'm just going to sell my house and buy another house, to, hey, like maybe I'm just going to do an addition. Like, does that make more sense for me? And how you can actually add value versus being the agent that commission breathy, right? Of oh, you should just sell. It's a great time to sell. You should buy, and actually advise them properly, because one of the big things we talk about on this podcast is our job is to be the people that tell them what is the actual better decision. Not what the better decision is for the agent themselves, but actually helping people make the right real estate decisions. So get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, as we've talked about before, we do large-scale renovations on rental property. I'm doing a large-scale addition on my own house. I know enough about this marketplace kind of to be dangerous, and I think If you don't, you probably should know at least some basics about doing additions, what they sort of cost, have some contractors that are available to potentially do those renovations. And I will meet my clients at their house with contractors, walk through a project, come up with ideas, help them understand what the best move might be, what the impact on the value of their home is going to be. Because down the road, I realized that either they're going to employ me to sell their home when it does come time to sell it, even if they do addition, but also like they're going to talk about that to their friends and family and say, this guy knows renovations. And I always run into people now. I mean, I have two of them that I'm working on right now with buyers, that one of them wants to do about a $300,000 renovation, basement plus an addition. Met with my GC at the house. We worked the whole thing out.
A house they already own, or they're buying a house?
They put an offer in. So I'm there with my GC, and me and him are just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. My client's like, whoa, like, I don't even know what you guys are talking about, but it sounds great to me. Like, what's it going to look like, kind of thing. And that's just a huge value add to people. And that doesn't necessarily even come up. Like, my buyer maybe wouldn't even consider buying a home like that unless they knew I knew how to help them, right? And they trusted that I was going to get them the right people, get them in the right situation. So it opened up my buyer's search to a home that has been on the market for 3 weeks because it's too small for what the price is. So I think if your focus is always, and again, to the point of this podcast, adding as much value for your clients, but also your past clients or your peers or your friends or whoever, no matter what they want to do, and you make it not about you, but about them, you see your business like triple overnight because they're going to tell people about it. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, my agent did this. And they're like, wait a minute, they didn't like sell the house? Well, like, no, they sold to me 5 years ago. Then they came with their contractor and they gave me a bunch of ideas about how I could renovate my current place. They're like, well, we would love to do a fixer upper. And then all of a sudden you're getting a referral. So the name of the game, again, is just to get as much value out there as you can, learn about these things so you can be valuable, and then just deliver on that value proposition. Because whether they're selling their home now, 10 years in the future, or their friend wants to buy or sell a house or whatever, the more that you're in front of people and the more that you know what you're doing, the better you're going to be.
And for agents out there that need to hear it, your clients, your past clients, they're not stupid. They're going to make whatever decision they choose to make regardless of what you tell them. And so you're better off just giving them the value for making a better decision than you are trying to convince them to do something. Because if you try and convince them to sell their house when they don't want to sell their house, what's going to happen is they're not going to sell their house, and then you're going to get 0 transactions. But if you go up to them and go, yeah, maybe you shouldn't sell your house. This is what it would look like if you didn't sell your house. And then they choose not to sell your house, you're going to get their friends. And then you're going to have multiple transactions opposed to having 0 transactions.
And I think the big thing too is if you're working with buyers that aren't thinking outside the box in that way, right? I have a client who is keeping their house to rent it, which I encourage them to do. I'm going to help them figure out how to rent their house
for free.
For free. Property management maybe coming soon.
Yes. But currently, like, you're just doing it because you want to help them.
Here's how you should price it. Here's how the process works. Here's how we do it. Yeah. Here's all the documents you might need to do this. They're going to make $1,200 a month.
Wow.
Because they bought when it was cheap and when the rates were great. And then they couldn't find a new home and they were so frustrated by that. Well, then we found them one that needs a little bit of work. Nobody else wanted it. I FaceTime my contractor while I was at the house showing it to him. I told them, you could buy this house. You could do this project for this amount of money. I'll get my guy on the phone right now. He'll come over to the house during the inspection. He'll bid the whole thing out, give you a bunch of ideas. I'll show you a picture of another client who did the exact same project. By the way, I texted my client. They sent me pictures. We're still at the house. I'm showing them. Look at this. It's the same floor plan, same structurally everything. And then the GC shows up to the inspection, bids it out at the exact same number we talked about. And now they're going, oh, we didn't love this house as is, but it has the space. It's in the area that we want. And now we can do the project that we want.
Love it. And that's all we have this week for the Nerdy Agent Podcast. And as always, remember, be better.